Hey guys, tonight we're easing into a story soaked in steam silence and powdered green mystery. You're in a low-ceilinged room with paper walls, bamboo lattices, and the gentle clink of ceramic against ceramic. The air smells like roasted rice straw and faint charcoal. Your knees ache a little from kneeling, but you're too distracted to care because across from you, a warlord just dipped a bamboo ladle into hot water. And somehow the fate of a province might rest on how long he stirs. This is a tea ceremony. And no, it's not just a relaxing hobby for introverts with expensive kettles. In feudal Japan, a tea ceremony was more than aesthetics and powdered matcha. It was diplomacy in disguise, a battle of grace and glances. Sometimes it was also the final act before someone mysteriously stopped breathing. You're about to drift through one of the most unexpectedly strategic rituals in history where silence wasn't awkward, it was weaponized. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where you're listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're barefoot stepping onto woven tatami. The room is small, intentionally so. Everything is deliberate. The way the kettle hisses, the way the host bows, even the way you enter the room crouched slightly humble, as if the act of lowering your head might somehow lower your ego too. It's late Muromachi period, say 15th century, and you're attending a chaji, the full formal tea gathering. 4 hours long, yes really. 4 hours of incense charcoal arranging, kaiseki meal courses, thin tea, thick tea, and social tension that could slice tofu. Outside Japan is still recovering from the chaos of on-again, off-again civil war. Inside this tiny room, the chaos is reduced, distilled, and steeped into perfect control. And you're a part of it now. The host doesn't speak unless necessary. You don't either. You're here to observe, not interrupt. The Takanoma. The alcove holds a single calligraphy scroll. It might read something like Ichigo Ichi one time, one meeting. A quiet reminder that this moment will never happen again. But you're also here to witness something else. A performance. Every flick of the wrist, every pour, every swirl of the chasen, the bamboo whisk is theater. But the audience isn't just watching, they're playing too. You glance around. One of the guests is a powerful retainer of a local daimyo. Another is a poet. Another quietly a spy. They don't wear name tags. They don't need to. Everyone in the room knows where everyone else stands, or kneels. Hierarchy is as much a part of the tea as the water. And here's the thing. Tea itself, imported. Originally from China, like many of the great philosophical and aesthetic traditions in Japan. But the Japanese made it their own, especially the powdered version, matcha whipped into a vivid, frothy green elixir. It's slightly bitter, earthy, like moss and secrets. You take a sip. It's hot, but not scalding. You feel the warmth travel down, calm but alert. Like something ancient just woke up behind your ribs. This is no casual snack break. You're beginning to see that the space around you has been engineered for psychological precision. The tea room is intentionally plain. Rustic, even. A direct contrast to the opulence outside. You're forced into minimalism. Forced to notice small things. The way the steam curls, the subtle crack in a tea bowl that's been repaired with gold. Wabi-sabi, the beauty of imperfection. You've heard that phrase before, right? Maybe on a throw pillow or in a minimalist cafe. But here it's strategy. It's misdirection. Make something seem humble enough and you'll never suspect the power behind it. Historians still argue whether these early tea ceremonies were truly spiritual in origin, or simply retrofitted with Zen philosophy after they caught on with the ruling class. The truth, as always, is somewhere between the whisk and the whisper. What's clear is that by the time you're sitting here, tea is no longer just a monk's meditative ritual. It's become a full-blown political language. And like any good language, it can include sarcasm, threats, compliments, and lies. The tea host rises to replenish the kettle. You notice his sleeve brush a small flower vase, a single sprig of pine and plum. Seasonal, intentional. A poetic jab, maybe. Someone recently lost a winter campaign. No one speaks it, but everyone feels it. Outside, a bird chirps once. Inside, the ladle dips again. You've been in the room for maybe 40 minutes. It feels like 5. Or 10 hours. Hard to tell. Time here is shaped by the ceremony itself, not clocks. A tray is placed before you. Simple sweets to balance the bitterness. You bow before taking one. That gesture matters more than the sugar. This isn't just about tea. It's about power softened into ritual, ego flattened beneath layers of etiquette, and influence served one careful sip at a time. You're beginning to realize this ceremony doesn't end when the tea is finished. It lingers. The memory of how it felt, who moved when what was said or what wasn't, can influence politics, land deals, even marriages. It's all unspoken. That's what makes it powerful. And dangerous. A rival once smiled through a full chaji, praised the tea, admired the scroll, complimented the host's skill, and then assassinated him the next day. Not out of disrespect, but because the ceremony revealed too much, or maybe too little. Tea doesn't lie, but it doesn't always tell the truth either. You finish your bowl. The host bows deeply. The ceremony is closing, but something tells you this isn't over. Not really. The room is emptying, the air still warm with incense and steam. You rise, feet tingling, and walk backward to the sliding door. You bow. The host bows. Everyone bows. It's a lot of bowing, but it means something. It places you back into the world gently, like the last line of a poem. And as you step out into the sunlight, your feet brushing warm stones, the conversation behind you begins. Deals are struck. Words are exchanged. Tea has opened the gate. You smile. You survived. Barely. You blink against the brightness outside. After the hushed, shadowy serenity of the tea room, the real world feels louder. Brasher, even slightly rude. Crows caw from a cypress nearby, and somewhere down the sloped path a merchant is shouting about salted fish, as if the fate of the shogunate depends on it. Your sandals crunch gravel. You're walking away from a tea ceremony, but you're also carrying it with you. The taste of that last sip still lingers grassy and dry. The host's sleeve, the sound of the ladle, the scroll in the alcove. It's all swimming in your mind like koi beneath a ripple. But let's rewind. Because to understand why any of this matters, to grasp how powdered green leaves could tilt politics and end alliances, we need to understand where this all started. Not in a noble villa, not even in a Zen temple, but in the hand of a traveling monk, and a steaming bowl passed in silence. You trace it back to the 8th century. The Tang dynasty in China is flourishing, and a few Japanese monks make their way there to study Buddhism, bringing home more than just scripture. They return with rituals, relics, and tea. Specifically, powdered tea matcha. At first it's medicinal. Tea is for monks, for clarity, for staying awake through long sutras. It's calming but precise. Think espresso with a better wardrobe. But Japan is good at this, absorbing outside influence, remixing it into something new. And so powdered tea begins its slow journey from monastery to elite circle, from ascetic ritual to aesthetic spectacle. By the 12th century, the practice is no longer just sacred, it's stylish. Samurai begin to dabble. They compete not with swords, but with tea sets. Wealthy clans host tucha contests, tea-tasting games that involve blind sipping different brews and identifying their origin. It's like wine tasting, but with more swords hanging on the wall. These gatherings evolve, from rowdy contests to elegant performances. And somewhere along the way, the lines between religion refinement and ruthless social maneuvering start to blur. You reach a small wooden bridge. Below, a trickle of water curls around smooth stones. It smells like cedar and memory. You pause there a moment, because this is where the next character walks in, Sen no Rikyu. Historians still argue whether he was more philosopher or power broker, but everyone agrees Rikyu changed everything. He didn't invent the tea ceremony, but he sculpted it. Pared it down, wove it tightly into Zen philosophy, and turned it into a quiet thunderclap of intent. He emphasized wabi-cha, a style rooted in simplicity, rustic beauty, and poetic imperfection. Rough pottery, muted colors, rooms with low ceilings and dim light. And here's the twist: this humble aesthetic was deeply political, because while everything looked rustic, it required immense skill, money, and control. Hosting a perfect tea ceremony under the wabi ideal wasn't about throwing leaves in water. It was about mastering the tiniest details until they hummed in harmony. You're back on the path passing a woman arranging moss along a garden edge. She doesn't look up, but she knows you're there. You nod and she nods slightly back. It's not a greeting, it's an acknowledgement, a shared awareness. That's what tea teaches you. And Sen no Rikyu. He served the most powerful men in Japan. Oda Nobunaga, then Toyotomi Hideyoshi. Both warlords, both wielders of absolute power, and both obsessed with tea. Because Rikyu taught them that tea wasn't a hobby, it was a language, a stage, a mirror. Imagine this two generals in a war-torn country kneel quietly in a 5-mat room, sipping bitter tea from a chipped bowl, each waiting to see who moves first, who breathes wrong, who reaches for the cup too quickly. No shouting, no armies, just a performance of peace charged with tension. There's a legend likely embellished but too good to ignore that Hideyoshi once brought Rikyu to a tea hut with a freshly bloomed morning glory garden. Rikyu, known for his love of the flower, was expected to admire it. But when he arrived, the entire garden had been cut down. Gone. Then inside the tea room, a single morning glory sat in a vase. That's tea power. Control. Precision. Restraint. The ability to make someone feel awe without a single word. To tell an entire story with one flower. You follow the sound of wooden sandals and soon arrive at a villa. Inside, a chaji is being prepared. You're not invited this time. But you know what's happening. The scroll is already hung. The incense has started burning. The guests are arriving slowly, quietly, perhaps suspiciously. Because by this era, tea isn't just art. It's surveillance, diplomacy, pretense. Hosting a tea ceremony lets you gather information. Learn who's aligning with whom, who hesitates, who flatters too much, who doesn't show up. It's a chessboard of lacquered trays and steamed rice where the rook might be a rice cracker, and the queen's gambit is whether to compliment the iron kettle or not. And then, of course, there's the kill. Oh yes, we'll get there eventually. Tea didn't always end peacefully. Rikyu himself, after rising to immense influence, was ordered to commit ritual suicide by Hideyoshi. No one knows exactly why. Maybe politics? Maybe power? Maybe the tea master simply became too powerful. One day he served a tea to the shogun. Another he was gone. But his legacy still steaming. You reach a bench. Sit. Watch the wind tug gently at the bamboo stalks. The sound is soft, repetitive, comforting. You think about how tea ceremonies in this period functioned like neutral ground. Rivals could meet without guards, speak without saying much, offer compliments that doubled as warnings, all beneath the guise of calm. One bowl of tea, 1,000 ripples, and somewhere just beneath the surface of all that silence, a country shaping itself. The next morning starts with the slow rhythm of sweeping. A host prepares a garden path by hand, brushing away fallen leaves with a bamboo broom, one soft scrape at a time. No servants, no delegation. Because if you're serving tea, real tea, you're the one who cleans. Every stroke matters, every pebble counts. You crouch nearby, watching from the shade of a pine. You're not here to intrude, just to observe. The light filters through the needles overhead in scattered golden rays, flickering like a silent prelude to what's about to unfold. Because this isn't just preparation, it's theater. And in feudal Japan, where appearances hold the weight of entire provinces, a tea ceremony is rehearsed as carefully as a kabuki performance. Maybe more so. The tea house today is a small one nestled into a fold of hillside. That's not by accident. These structures are deliberately modest, earth-colored plaster wooden beams, a thatched roof softened by moss. You'd miss it if you weren't looking, which is exactly the point. Hidden power is the most potent kind. Inside the room is austere. 4.5 tatami mats, a kettle suspended from a hook, a low door called the Nijiriguchi, just big enough for you to crawl through. Even warlords must bow to enter. Everyone is equal here, or at least supposed to be. Historians still argue whether this enforced humility was genuine or calculated. Was the tea room a space of true spiritual equality, or simply a stage where samurai could act humble while calculating their next land grab? It depends who you ask, and when. You move closer. A guest arrives. He's older, wearing a well-worn indigo robe and carrying a fan tucked in his sleeve. He doesn't announce himself. He doesn't need to. The host bows slow and low, and the guest mirrors the gesture. This is diplomacy without speeches. Now the ceremony begins. First, a meal kaiseki. Small, delicate dishes served in silence or with the lightest conversation. Seasonal vegetables, pickled roots, maybe a sliver of grilled river fish. Nothing extravagant, but beneath the simplicity layers of strategy. That steamed daikon grown in a domain allied with the guest's rival. That lacquerware crafted in a region with recent trade tensions. Every choice is a message couched in politeness. Tea is just the final act. You shift your weight slightly. The sun has climbed higher now, warming the garden stones. The air is still. Not a breeze stirs the cloth banner hung at the entrance. Inside, the host carefully folds the fukusa, a square of silk used to purify the utensils. Every movement is deliberate. There's no rushing in the tea room. Rushing implies nervousness, and in this context, nervousness could mean weakness. You've seen enough by now to know that nothing here is just for show. Take the tea bowl, for example. It's not flashy, in fact it's rough. Maybe cracked slightly. Perhaps even repaired with golden lacquer kintsugi to emphasize the flaw rather than hide it. That's wabi-sabi, the aesthetic of imperfection. A crack is not a mistake. It's a story. And a warning beauty is not in perfection, it's in survival. The host ladles hot water into the bowl. Whisks the matcha. Steam rises. The green froth forms a soft whirl like a galaxy in miniature. The guest receives it with both hands, rotates the bowl slightly to avoid drinking from the front, and sips. They exchange no words. But everything has been said. Outside, you take a breath. You can almost taste the quiet. It's not boring. It's not even passive. It's dense with meaning. And yet to an outsider, especially one from the West, it might look like nothing is happening. Just two people sharing tea in a room made of straw and paper. But beneath that silence, politics. Because in this moment, what's being traded isn't just hospitality, it's trust. Or the illusion of it. This ceremony might seal a truce, or stall a betrayal. It might offer a safe space for two clans to test each other's reactions. A tiny theater where real power gets rehearsed. There's a famous tale about a tea gathering hosted by a minor lord in the late Muromachi period. He invited two rival samurai leaders claiming neutrality. During the ceremony, he served them from the same tea bowl. A shared cup, a gesture of unity. Later that year, one of those leaders spared his lands during a border skirmish. Was it the tea? Was it the message in the bowl? Historians shrug. But samurai took note. Tea had become a political tool as sharp as any katana. Back in the present, the ceremony winds down. The guest returns the bowl, the host bows. Final gestures are made. It's over. And yet nothing has changed, not visibly. But everything has. You rise from your place in the shadows and begin to walk the path again, heart strangely full. Because even now, hundreds of years later, you can feel it. That gentle pressure in the chest. That awe born of quiet power. One sip at a time, this ceremony has shaped alliances, stalled wars, and crowned kings. Not by force, but by grace. And that perhaps is the greatest trick of all. You wander deeper into the hillside following a quiet stone path that snakes between pine trunks and moss. The earth feels soft beneath your feet. The hush of distant wind brushing past your ear like an old friend with something secret to say. The further you go, the more the world fades until you reach a wooden gate. Behind it is a larger estate perched slightly above the valley. And inside that estate, one of the most powerful men in Japan, Ashikaga Yoshimasa, shogun, poet, mediocre politician, but a man whose obsession with tea will shape the cultural DNA of an entire nation. You step through the gate. The estate is spacious but restrained. Painted screens, smooth floors, lacquered corridors bathed in light and shadow. Somewhere inside, someone plays a bamboo flute, its notes rising and vanishing like mist. And there, in the heart of it all, sits Yoshimasa's silver pavilion. Not silver in color, more an idea, a shimmering dream of elegance and decay. You duck into a narrow hallway and emerge near the back garden where a tea room is being built. Not just any tea room. This is the beginning of something strange, something potent. Because in Yoshimasa's hands, tea becomes more than a drink. It becomes a political refuge. A place where real governance tired volatile loud steps aside for a subtler kind of rule. You might be surprised. The shogun doesn't rule like a warrior. He doesn't organize conquests or stage grand military displays. In fact, historians still argue whether he ever had the stomach for politics at all. What he does instead? He curates, he collects, he refines. He builds tea rooms and invites thinkers, artists, poets, Buddhist monks, even rival lords. Because Yoshimasa's genius, if you can call it that, isn't domination. It's redirection. He lures the powerful into smaller spaces where swords are left at the door and conversations flow like thin, green streams of tea. There are no thrones here, no generals shouting, just mats, steam, and silence. And that silence, it's disarming. You crouch beside a weathered cedar beam and listen as one guest, a rival lord from the western provinces, remarks that the tea bowl is chipped. Yoshimasa doesn't flinch. He just nods. Yes, he says it was made imperfect, like us. That line will echo for centuries. Yoshimasa isn't trying to solve Japan's political chaos. He's trying to survive it. While the country fractures into dozens of warring domains, he turns inward, into aesthetics, into ceremony, into wabi, the beauty of restraint, of simplicity, of what's not said. Some historians call this evasion, others call it genius. But here's the twist: Yoshimasa's retreat into tea doesn't make him irrelevant. It makes him magnetic. Lords from every corner want to sip from his bowl, to stand in his garden, to copy his rituals. Suddenly, everyone's building tea houses. Everyone wants to out-wabi each other. And in this strange, passive war of refinement, Yoshimasa quietly redefines cultural prestige. You hear about it in whispers. A daimyo from Kyushu spends a fortune importing old Korean pottery. A courtier offers a prized inkstone instead of land as a dowry gift. A rival clan assassinates a man just to steal his heirloom tea scoop. This isn't tea, it's a new currency. And the shogun, he smiles in his wooden chamber cloaked in the scent of incense and pine and lets it all unfold. One afternoon you're invited into a small tea room on the edge of the estate. You crawl through the nijiraguchi adjusting your robe, heart oddly tight in your chest. The room is warm, dim, and quiet. On the wall hangs a calligraphy scroll with just one word. Stillness. You sit, and for a moment it really feels like stillness is the most powerful force in the world. No one speaks. The host, an aging monk with soft steps and eyes like a pond in winter, prepares the tea. You watch the whisk move, the steam rise, the glaze shimmer on the bowl, and you realize something. In this room right now, no armies march, no walls fall, no titles shift, but power is being transferred, influence traded, reputations burnished, one sip at a time. That night, back in your borrowed quarters, you stare at the ceiling and wonder how long this illusion can last. Can politics really be softened with silence? Can conflict be delayed by aesthetics? You're not the only one wondering. Because outside this elegant retreat, the country is burning. The Onin War has begun an ugly, sprawling conflict that will mark the start of the Sengoku period, the age of warring states. Castles will burn, alliances will crumble, blood will spill. But here in Yoshimasa's garden, the kettle still boils. The guests still bow. And in the quiet folds of steam and ceremony, the idea of peace, however fragile, remains. Even if it's just a pause, even if it's just a room, even if it's just a sip, you wake to the soft hush of pre-dawn fog drifting across Kyoto's tiled rooftops. Somewhere a rooster tries and fails to assert dominance. But here in the Genkakuji compound, Yoshimasa's silver pavilion estate, the world remains hushed like it's waiting for someone to speak first. You step into the dewy courtyard sandals dampening quietly as you approach a side structure, newly completed a tea house. Not grand, not gilded, just 4.5 tatami mats, a hanging scroll, and a tiny hearth. Doesn't look like a political weapon, but it is. Because now that Yoshimasa has created this space, others are copying it. And not just the walls or the bowls, but the philosophy, the quiet, the control through absence. What began as personal aesthetic retreat is becoming a blueprint for power. A new kind of hierarchy shaped not by military might or land ownership, but by taste. You don't earn status now by conquering territory. You earn it by choosing the right teacup. This strange new tea culture needs someone to shape it. Someone to write the rules. Define the rituals, decide what counts as refined and what's just trying too hard. Enter Murata Yuko, a name you may not know but should. He's not a warrior, not a politician. He's a Zen monk, soft-spoken, sharp-eyed, and deeply in tune with Yoshimasa's vision. Where others see tea rooms as exotic hobbies, Juko sees a vessel, a method, a spiritual art. He calls it Channoyu, the way of tea. You find him kneeling in a narrow room stirring powdered green tea with a long bamboo whisk. He moves slowly, deliberately, with the same energy you might use to untangle a necklace or comfort a restless child. Everything is soft, intentional, sacred. He speaks without raising his voice. The tea bowl is not beautiful because it is perfect, he says. It is beautiful because it is honest. You glance at the bowl. It's asymmetrical, slightly rough. The glaze has pooled unevenly at the base. It looks incomplete. And that's exactly the point. Juko calls this wabi, a term rooted in Zen Buddhism, in the appreciation of impermanence and imperfection. It's the idea that something humble and flawed might be more real, more human than something polished and flawless. Historians still argue whether Juko invented wabi-cha, the style of tea focused on rustic, imperfect elements, or simply formalized it. But there's no question he made it fashionable and political. Because in a world where daimyos compete to flaunt wealth and lineage, a cracked tea bowl becomes an anti-symbol. A rejection of luxury that whispers, "I am above all that." Juko doesn't write a manifesto. He doesn't stage demonstrations. He does something quieter and possibly more lasting. He trains students, disciples who will carry his ethos forward, embedding it so deeply into Japanese culture that it will shape art, architecture, literature, and even gardening for centuries. You sit with him in the tea room sipping tea brewed so precisely that the steam lifts in a perfect spiral. The room is bare. The scroll on the wall reads, "One moment, one meeting." A reminder that every tea gathering is unique, unrepeatable, fleeting, like power, like life, like the chance to say something meaningful and say it just right before the moment passes. Juko leans forward. His sleeve brushes the tatami. "In the tea room, all are equal," he says. You raise an eyebrow. He smiles. No swords, no ranks, just presence. Of course, this is technically untrue. Daimyos are still daimyos. Lords still bring entourages. But something shifts in the room when tea is served. Silence blooms. Eyes lower. Even powerful men grow thoughtful. You begin to see the brilliance in this structure. Tea is a frame that makes even a warlord sit still. And in stillness, power changes shape. That's the trick, isn't it? Juko isn't challenging the political order, he's slipping past it. Teaching its participants to seek prestige not through violence or gold, but through harmony, humility, and a precisely timed pour. This quiet revolution tucked inside bowls and scrolls starts to spread. Soon, every respectable estate must have a tea room. Every lord must own a kawan, tea bowl. And not just any chawan, but one with history. With flaws. With stories etched into its clay. You hear rumors of daimyos trading entire rice harvests for a single old Korean tea bowl. One general defeated in battle leaves behind a note apologizing not for the loss, but for having shattered his host's antique tea scoop. It's absurd, and also incredibly effective. Because what Juko has built is a parallel court. A cultural arena with its own rules, its own currency, its own quiet pressures. He's created a space where influence flows not through edicts or swords, but through silence and grace. The tea room becomes a testing ground. Can you stay calm under pressure? Can you sense the mood of the room? Can you match the tone of a conversation without dominating it? If so, you might just be trusted with more than a tea whisk. You might be trusted with counsel, with diplomacy, with decisions that matter. Juko never says any of this aloud. He just keeps whisking. He pours, he bows, he fades back into the quiet. And by doing so, he leaves behind a legacy that whispers through the centuries. Real power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it steeps. You're back in Kyoto, but things feel different now. Not louder, just denser. The air seems charged, the politics stickier. Like every syllable spoken at court comes with a hidden clause. And everyone, absolutely everyone, has suddenly discovered a deep personal passion for tea. It's been a few decades since Murata Juko's quiet revolution, and now Channoyu has become a social phenomenon. Not a trend exactly. More like a password. A test. An invitation-only chess game where the moves are gestures and the board is 4.5 tatami mats wide. You're inside the residence of a powerful daimyo, watching a gathering unfold. The host kneels before a low hearth, preparing the water with the same gravity you might use to handle live explosives. His sleeves fall into perfect folds. His tea bowl, a rustic Korean piece slightly chipped, is handled like it might burst into tears if disrespected. Across from him, 3 guests sit in absolute stillness. Each is a man of consequence, landowners, warriors, whisperers of policy. And yet here they bow. They compliment the kettle's hiss. They discuss the beauty of a single bamboo ladle as if it were foreign policy. This is no longer just aesthetics, it's strategy. See, hosting a tea gathering is now a political act. The layout of the tea room signals your values. The utensils reflect your network. The scroll you hang in the alcove. A coded message poetry as positioning. Historians still argue whether tea ceremonies were ever truly neutral ground, but one thing is clear: they were curated. Carefully, relentlessly. Every item, every phrase, every moment calibrated to build trust, score points, or subtly undermine a rival. And you're starting to see it all. You see how the host pours slightly more tea for one guest than another. You see how the room's only flower, just one, leans toward the man with the least power, making him feel noticed. You see how the conversation drifts toward recent border skirmishes. But no one mentions names, just metaphors, just glances. And then silence. Long, deliberate silence. It stretches. And in that space, you realize something dangerous is happening. Not violence, not accusation. Something more sophisticated. Consensus. Because here's the truth in feudal Japan. Formal diplomacy is messy. Letters are intercepted. Envoys are liabilities. Alliances are too public. But a tea ceremony that's private. Controlled. Understood only by the participants. It's the perfect vessel for negotiation. And so across the country, tea gatherings become informal summits. Territories are divided. Marriages arranged. Armies redirected. All while steam rises from a pot and someone quietly compliments the weathered texture of a ceramic cup. You leave the tea room dazed. The world outside feels louder now, less elegant. You pass a trio of foot soldiers laughing over dumplings, unaware that their next campaign may have just been plotted over frothy matcha. You keep walking, because there's someone else you want to meet. A man named Takenoju. He's not noble by birth. Not a monk either. A merchant's son, technically, which makes his rise impressive. And telling, because Ju doesn't claw his way into power with force. He does it with taste. He studies Juko's teachings, embraces wabi-cha, and refines it even further leaner, quieter, more severe. His tea rooms are sparse to the point of tension. His tea bowls so humble they border on tragic. But that's his genius. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, Ju's tea room is a leveler. He invites samurai, priests, poets, peasants. He brews the same tea for them all. And somehow this earns him influence. Because people talk after they've shared tea. They confess. They offer favors. They admit uncertainties they'd never say aloud in a castle. Historians debate whether Ju was more artist or operator, but his impact is clear. He weaponized simplicity, turned aesthetic restraint into a signal of authenticity. You meet him on a rainy afternoon under the eaves of a quiet temple. He doesn't bow deeply, he doesn't speak much. He just pours you tea and watches your hands as you receive it. Then softly he says, tea is not escape, it is mirror. You nod, though you're not sure you understand yet. Later you will? Later when you see how lords begin copying his style. How his tea rooms become trendsetters. How invitations to his chinoyu are coveted more than titles. He doesn't wield a sword. He doesn't own a province. But when he nods, daimyos listen. You leave him in the drizzle, the taste of matcha still lingering, and realize that chinoyu has reached a new stage. It is no longer a quiet art. It is a political language, and only the fluent will thrive. You're standing outside a modest wooden house, tucked inside the city of Sakai. It doesn't look like much: plain walls, a quiet garden, a single pine tree curving gently against the breeze. But inside is a revolution. You slide open the door, and there he is, Sen no Rikyu. Or rather just Rikyu now. Names don't matter much once you've become a concept. He kneels in silence, arranging a few dried wildflowers in a clay vase. He wears no ornament, no sword. His robe is a muted brown like soil or bark or old tea. You feel like apologizing for the brightness of your sandals. Welcome to the world of wabi-cha taken to its final form. You sit across from him. He nods once. No smile, but no coldness either. He pours hot water into a tea bowl. Nothing elegant, nothing imported. Just a rough handmade vessel with uneven glaze and a chip on the rim that somehow makes it more precious. The tea is thick, bitter, no sugar, no distraction. And you drink, and something changes. Not in the tea, not in the room, but in you. Because this is not just tea. This is discipline. This is ethics. This is resistance disguised as tranquility. Rikyū doesn't preach. He doesn't teach. He just is. And that somehow teaches everything. His tea rooms are stripped down to bare essentials, a bamboo scoop, a blackened kettle, a single calligraphy scroll that reads, nothingness. And in this stripped-down world, power becomes visible. You see it in the way people bow before him. Not because he demands it, but because he earned it. See, Rikyū is the tea master to the most powerful man in Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, the unifier, the warlord with a golden fan and a temper sharper than any katana. And yet, here he sits on woven tatami waiting patiently for Rikyū to serve him. Historians still argue how deep their bond truly ran. Were they friends, rival symbols of different philosophies? But here's the undeniable fact. Hideyoshi, who could order cities to burn, entrusted Rikyū with shaping Japan's cultural future through bowls of powdered green silence. And Rikyū used that influence carefully, dangerously even. You hear the stories whispered in the hallways of Kyoto, how Rikyū refused to flatter, how he rejected expensive gifts, how he designed a tea room so small Hideyoshi had to crawl to enter. Not to humiliate, but to remind him, even the most powerful must bow to beauty, and beauty that's not gold leaf and lacquer. Beauty is a weathered roof tile, a rusted iron kettle, a single chrysanthemum placed so perfectly you forget to breathe. You visit one of Rikyū's later tea huts named Tai-an. It's barely larger than a storage closet. The door is tiny. You crawl in, knees creaking, ego dissolving. Inside, silence. Straw mats. Ash. Light filtering through slats like soft geometry. No throne. No audience. Just you, the tea, and the unbearable clarity of yourself. Rikyū believed tea should be about ma, the space between. The pause, the negative, the unspoken. And so every element of his ceremony slows you down. You fold your hands slower. You exhale deeper. You notice your own breathing. It's not religion, but it feels sacred. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because Chinoyu under Rikyū is no longer just taste. It's philosophy. It's critique. It's a quiet rejection of arrogance, wealth, excess. And while the samurai nod politely at the message, not all of them like it. Especially not Hideyoshi. Something begins to fracture. You hear of arguments. Small things. A golden tea house that Rikyū detests. A statue of Rikyū placed above the entrance to a temple higher than the image of the shogun. Was it vanity, a misunderstanding? We don't know. Historians still debate whether the break was personal or political. But the end is the same. Rikyū is ordered to die. No trial, no protest. Just a message one morning performs seppuku. Today, he does. In a quiet room with his favorite tea bowl beside him, he composes a final verse. Welcome to my death, a full moon glows overhead and the wind blows clean. And with that, the man who made tea sacred dies by his own hand. You sit alone in his old tea room. The kettle hisses. The scroll reads, remember the shadow? You sip your tea and feel the ache. Because Rikyū didn't just serve tea. He served a vision. A reminder that power must kneel to simplicity. That truth needs no ornament. And that silence, well used, is louder than drums. His death leaves a vacuum. His teachings scatter. Some are preserved in scrolls, others in memory. But the essence of his style, wabi restraint depth through emptiness, endures. Across Japan, disciples try to keep the flame alive. Some soften his edges, others double down. But all know something profound passed through their hands and left a mark they'll spend a lifetime interpreting. And you sip what's left in your bowl and watch the steam curl upward. No words, just gratitude. You walk the quiet streets of Kyoto now, long after Rikyū's death, and something feels different. The tea houses are still there, bamboo gates, stone paths, flickering lanterns, but the air carries a strange tension. Like someone's whispering through cupped hands. And in a way they are. Because now everyone wants to control the tea. You step into a tea room that once belonged to one of Rikyū's disciples. It looks the same on the surface, worn tatami simple scroll, the scent of incense curling through the beams. But underneath, you feel it's something more curated, more cautious. The silence isn't humble anymore, it's strategic. Welcome to the age of schools. After Rikyū's death, his teachings don't vanish, they splinter. His followers, each claiming a piece of the master's legacy, begin to form lineages. What was once fluid becomes codified. What was intuitive becomes categorized. Three families rise to prominence: Urasenke, Omotesenke, and Mushinokoji Senke. Together they're called the San Senki, or Three Sen houses. You visit a gathering at one of their estates. The head of the family wears a muted indigo robe. His gestures are precise, not performative, just practiced. He bows before entering the tea room. Inside, everything is arranged just so. The scroll reads, "One time, one meeting. Ichigo Ichie. One encounter, never to be repeated." It's a beautiful idea. But you can't help but notice how institutional everything feels. The scoop must be held at this angle. The tea stirred in this pattern. The guest must respond with this phrase. There are manuals now. Rankings, exams. Historians still argue whether this formalization honored or diluted Rikyu's original vision. Because while the aesthetics remain, the spirit is shifting. Tea is becoming professionalized. And with professionalism comes power. You overhear a daimyo speaking in hushed tones with a tea master. They're not talking about water temperature. They're discussing territory, alliances, who will sit closest to whom at the next gathering. Tea has become a kind of soft diplomacy, an unspoken language where silence replaces swords and the placement of a teacup can signal loyalty or dissent. You sip slowly from your bowl and realize this isn't just culture. It's camouflage. Because when political meetings became too dangerous, they moved into tea houses, where formality shields intent, where the ceremony's rhythm provides cover for conversations too dangerous for courtyards. One man enters as a rival, leaves as an ally. No one hears what changed, only the rustle of robes and the clink of porcelain. In this era, a skilled tea master isn't just someone who knows how to blend matcha. He's someone who knows when to speak, when to remain silent, and when to gently steer the conversation by offering a second bowl of tea instead of a reply. You see one such master now. He's serving a minor lord and his envoy. The atmosphere is dense with expectation. Each gesture is deliberate. Each phrase chosen like a chess move. And you can tell this isn't just about hospitality. It's about testing the air, measuring intent, reading the folds of the sleeves for hidden threats. One guest lingers a little too long over a comment about border skirmishes. The tea master gently interrupts with a compliment about the moon. Distraction, redirection, control. You're watching theater. But the stakes are real. And the odd part, it works. Because within the structure of tea, everyone must slow down. Everyone must bow. Everyone must listen. Even generals. Even spies. Even you. But there's another side too. As tea becomes a system, it also becomes exclusive. Invitations are currency. Apprenticeships are rare. The materials, tea bowls, kettles, scrolls become objects of prestige traded like gold. You hear of a single tea scoop changing hands for the price of a village. Some say this is a corruption. Others call it evolution. Historians still debate whether the ossification of tea ceremony was necessary for its survival. But for now, you sit in the back corner of a tea room, watching a new generation take the stage. Young men in crisp robes reciting phrases they barely understand. Old masters correcting the angle of a whisk with the severity of a fencing instructor. It's impressive, and a little sad. Because in all the precision, something is vanishing the messiness. The pause. The quiet rebellion of Rikyu's empty tea room. Still you see sparks. One apprentice forgets a line. Pauses, laughs, the room freezes. But then the tea master smiles. It's all right, he says. The tea is still hot. And just like that, the warmth returns. You leave the tea room under a full moon, feeling the earth settle beneath your feet. Because while the form may shift, the essence survives. The tea remains bitter. The silence remains full. And the power, it's still there, tucked between sips, waiting for those who can taste it. You're drifting now into the Edo period, Japan's long stretch of relative peace under Tokugawa rule, and the pace of life begins to shift. The swords are mostly sheathed. The cities expand, merchants flourish, and the tea becomes an anchor. You're in a merchant's house today. Not a samurai estate, not a daimyo's fortress. Just a well-to-do family of tradesmen who've saved enough to build their own small chashitsu, the tea room. And what you notice first, it's modest. 4.5 mats, a low entrance, the water jar already steaming. This is something new. Because for the first time, tea is stretching beyond the nobility. It's filtering downward, quietly, politely, but unmistakably. What once symbolized elite alliances now begins to shape middle-class identity. Tea doesn't just define power, it defines taste. The family's teenage son, proud but nervous, is hosting tonight's tea. He's been practicing for weeks. His sleeves are spotless. His fukusa cloth has been folded and refolded so many times it's practically memorized the shape of the tea scoop. He bows. He begins. His parents watch from the corner, not as teachers, as guests. You sip the tea and smile. It's bitter but balanced, like effort made visible. Historians still argue whether the Edo period democratized the tea ceremony or simply franchised it. After all, the rules are still strict. The scroll's still cryptic. But the tone is softer now. Less about maneuvering for power, more about cultivating presence. You walk through a Kyoto alley the next day and spot a hand-painted sign, tea lessons. Beginners welcome. Imagine that. You peek in and see a group of women, children, and even a retired carpenter all seated around a low table. They're laughing softly. One accidentally drops her tea scoop. No one gasps. Instead, they pause, retrieve it gently, and continue. You think Rikyu would have approved. Because now tea is no longer just for warriors and whisperers. It's becoming a daily art, a discipline, a mindfulness practice in embroidered slippers. You sit in a small tea room attached to a printmaker's house. The wall is hung with a seasonal image, plum blossoms and snow. The host offers you higashi, delicate sweets pressed into the shape of maple leaves. Then the tea. It's warm, bright green. The chastened bamboo whisk froths it into a light foam. You sip, and for a moment the entire world stills. That's the magic now. You're not using tea as a political wedge. You're using it to carve out space. Amid the hustle of growing cities, the endless etiquette, the rigid social tiers, the tea ceremony becomes a loophole. A place where class blurs, if only slightly. Where a merchant can host a samurai. Where a woman can lead. Where a child can speak. Of course, not everyone's thrilled. Some conservatives grumble that tea is losing its edge, that it's becoming hobbyist, that the sacred is being replaced with the social. One elderly master scoffs at a gathering that includes a kabuki actor and a female poet. What's next, he mutters. Dogs! But you just raise your bowl to the moonlight filtering through a washi paper screen. Because while old men argue about form, the tea keeps pouring. In another corner of the city, a group of apprentices practices a different kind of tea. Not formal. Not codified. More spontaneous. Their tea room isn't even a room. It's a mossy glade behind a shrine. They use mismatched cups. The water is heated in a chipped iron pot. The sweets are stolen plums. But the silence between sips, it's reverent. And you feel something blooming here. A return perhaps to imperfection. Historians still debate whether these informal tea circles were rebellions or revivals. But the truth lies somewhere in the steam between them. Tea isn't static. It bends, expands, infuses. And in Edo, Japan, it begins to root itself into memory. You visit a young artist's studio where sketches of tea implements cover the walls. He's designing a new kind of bowl, low asymmetrical, inspired by river stones. He calls it Nagarzara, the flowing plate. You hold it. It fits oddly in your hand, then perfectly. He grins. Tea isn't about perfection, he says. It's about attention. You nod. You get it. Because what's shifting now isn't just the practice of tea, it's its purpose. Before tea was performance, politics, posture. Now it's poetry. You attend a moon-viewing gathering hosted by a retired swordsman-turned-calligrapher. The tea is brewed slow. The scroll reads simply, "To wait is to welcome." No one speaks unless they must. The moon rises. Everyone bows. You glance around the circle and notice the diversity: peasants and nobles, artists and mothers, a monk and a geisha. No swords, no guards, just tea. You realize something profound. In this era of enforced peace, the most subversive thing you can do is sit still. And people are doing it. Everywhere. Quietly. You leave the gathering just before dawn. The dew kisses your sandals. A rooster calls in the distance. Your breath fogs in the cool air and you smile. Because tea, once a tool for the mighty, has become a practice for the many. And somehow that's even more radical. You return to Kyoto in the early 1800s and the streets feel different. Busier somehow. More crowded, more layered. The Edo period is entering its twilight, and the stillness of the tea room now competes with the noise of merchant stalls, the clatter of rickshaws, and the drifting shouts of rice sellers. But step behind a sliding door and silence resumes. You're back inside a chashitsu, and this one belongs to a woman. She's not a noble, not a priestess. She's the widow of a mid-level official, smart, quiet, meticulous, and she's running one of Kyoto's most respected tea circles. Her sleeves are indigo. Her tea scoop is carved from an heirloom bamboo rod, signed by a now-forgotten master. And her gatherings politely subversive. You sit on the tatami mat watching her prepare the utensils with perfect care. But what strikes you more than her technique is her audience. 3 women, 2 men, all equals here. No guards, no household ranks, just shared breath. You listen. They're talking politics. Very gently, veiled, of course. Wrapped in metaphors about pine trees and seasonal rain, but the meaning clear as steam. One guest remarks, "When the shadows fall long before harvest, it may be time to replant." The woman nods. You sip the tea, thick, bright matcha whisked into a gentle froth, and realize what's happening here. In an era of growing censorship, tea rooms have become safe havens, places where dissent doesn't shout, it whispers. Historians still argue whether tea rooms like these were genuine sites of resistance or merely intellectual salons. But the truth is, as usual, a blend. Because when speech is limited, symbolism thrives. A tea bowl with a crack becomes a metaphor for a fractured regime. A guest arriving early signals tension. A single camellia in the alcove. A silent warning. You attend another gathering 2 weeks later. This one hosted by a former monk turned haiku poet. His tea house is practically invisible, hidden behind a curtain of weeping willow branches. Tonight's theme is transience. He speaks of frost settling on mountain reeds, of letters that never arrive, and of dynasties that wobble when their calendars fall out of step with the moon. No one mentions the shogunate by name. They don't need to. You sip your tea slowly. Feel it settle in your chest like truth, because the political power of tea hasn't vanished. It's just slipped into another form. More coded, more intimate, but no less potent. Outside the world strains with change. Western ships have begun to appear along the coastlines. Commodore Perry is looming in some not-so-distant future. The cracks in the Tokugawa order are beginning to show. But in here, it's still enough to feel the weight of every gesture. You watch the host place the tea caddy on a square of silk cloth, rotate it precisely, then lift it with 2 fingers as if offering the past itself. He begins the next stage of the ceremony in total silence. No commentary, no apology, just grace. You study his movements. Each one feels like punctuation, deliberate pauses between spoken truths. Another guest raises a soft question about trade ships in Nagasaki. Someone else offers a poem in response. 1,000 sails cast shadows, but the river keeps its path. You get the message. Everyone does. Because in this particular tea room, language isn't limited to words. You learn that some tea circles now operate as informal political salons. A few are tied to underground reformist groups. Others serve as information hubs, passing news between Kyoto and Edo with more accuracy than any official courier. Still, no one writes any of it down. The record is ritual. The archive is breath. You attend one more gathering, this time in a rural village. The host is elderly, nearly blind, but her sense of rhythm is flawless. The room is sparse. The fire is real. The sweet is simply a sliver of roasted yam. But when the tea is passed, no one speaks until every bowl has touched every hand. You count the silence between each sip. It feels like memory. And maybe that's the point. By now, you've seen tea change shape across centuries, from battlefield alliances to neighborhood courtyards, from daimyos to poets, from whispered rebellion to quiet resilience. And what you realize sitting in that humble room, lit by a single paper lantern, is that tea never loses power. It just changes its voice. Historians still wonder why tea endured through so many shifts, social, political, technological. Some say it's because of its adaptability. Others say it's due to the philosophy behind it, wabi-sabi, the beauty of impermanence. But maybe it's because tea understands something we forget. Stillness is not absence. It's intention. And intention, when practiced over centuries, becomes tradition, becomes language, becomes power. You walk out into the night air. Above you, the stars shimmer like fresh ground powder. The wind smells of pine and firewood. You hear frogs calling in a nearby stream, and in your hand the warmth of that final bowl lingers. Just long enough to remember, revolutions don't always start with fire. Sometimes they begin with foam. You're still in Japan, but something has shifted. It's 1868, and the Tokugawa shogunate gone. You hear the news passed along a rice paper fan. In a modest tea room, Edo has fallen, the emperor restored, and the Meiji era has officially begun. Modernization is sweeping in like a sudden monsoon, bringing with it railways, Western dress, and clocks that tick instead of shadows that fall. But in the tea room, the rhythm hasn't changed. You kneel on a tatami mat worn smooth with generations of knees. The kettle hums the same soft tune it always has. The host bows, then ladles steaming water into a weathered bowl. Matcha powder blooms into a green spiral, still thick, still bitter, still sacred. Outside, telegraph wires slice the sky. Inside, the only electricity is in the silence between gestures. Historians still argue whether Chinoyu survived the Meiji Restoration by retreating or adapting. But you're starting to realize the answer is both. Because even as Japan hurtles into the industrial age, tea practice remains both an anchor to the past and a flexible frame for a rapidly changing future. You attend a gathering hosted by a government official who once served under the shogunate and now works in foreign trade. His guests include 2 Dutch engineers, a Kyoto textile merchant, and a former samurai who now teaches ethics in a Tokyo academy. They sip tea. They quote Sen no Rikyu. They discuss tariffs. It's disorienting, but it's working. This isn't some nostalgic clinging, it's a recalibration. A deliberate act of keeping the core while rearranging the shell. The tea room has shifted from a space of feudal allegiance to a space of cultural resilience. Even the utensils have changed slightly. One host serves wagashi sweets shaped like steamships. Another uses a lacquered tray featuring Mount Fuji flanked by cranes and smokestacks. You chuckle. It's cheeky, but it fits. Because Japan isn't tearing down its traditions. It's weaving them into its transformation. In a tea school in Kyoto, a young woman leads the ceremony with grace. She's wearing a kimono, yes, but her hairstyle has adopted the latest Western curls. She places her tea scoop on a cloth with the precision of a scholar, then begins to speak in near-perfect French. You don't understand all the words, but you understand the posture, the pause, the purpose. She's presenting her culture, not as a curiosity, but as something alive. Your host tells you that during this time, tea teachers, especially women, became cultural ambassadors. They taught foreign diplomats about Japanese aesthetics, trained the daughters of newly risen merchants, and wrote scrolls explaining tea's seasonal symbolism in terms that even a European botanist might appreciate. One such scroll ends with the phrase, "A bowl of tea is not a wall, it is a gate." You attend another tea gathering in a newly built Western-style house. It's a curious hybrid velvet curtains, gas lamps, and tucked into the back, a perfect 6-mat chashitsu. The tea scoop rests next to a pocket watch. The host wears a stiff collar under his kimono. You sit, you sip, and you realize tea is becoming Japan's quiet diplomacy. While the world watches steamships and warships treaty ports and factory smoke tea ceremonies are offering another message. We are not what you think. We are older, deeper, more precise than any timetable can measure. Historians still debate how much influence tea culture had on Japan's image abroad. Some say it was merely ornamental. Others argue it was foundational to how Japan presented itself as modern but distinct. You just know that when a visiting German officer tried his first bowl of thick matcha, he cried. Not because of the taste, it was frankly bitter and confusing, but because of the moment. The quiet, the care, the unspoken grace, and that transcends translation. You begin to notice more tea gatherings held in Western schools, consulates, even aboard ships. The layout changes slightly, sometimes guests sit in chairs, but the essence remains. The bow, the brush, the breath before the sip. You hear that in Tokyo, tea rooms are springing up in train stations. Not chashits in the formal sense, but quiet corners where travelers can sit, sip, and reset. Even speed has been met with stillness. One day, you climb the newly constructed Tokyo Tower, a marvel of steel and engineering. From its base, a winding path leads you to a small tea room nestled in the park below. You step inside. The host is young, maybe 17. His movements are careful, not yet polished, but when he lifts the ladle and pours the steam curls upward in a spiral that feels eternal. You drink the tea, bitter, earthy, clean. And for a moment, you forget about telegrams and treaties and the hum of traffic just beyond the trees. Because you're here, in a space where time isn't ticking, It's unfolding. You walk out just as dusk begins to fall. The city glows, gas lamps flicker. Somewhere a street vendor shouts the price of roasted chestnuts. And in your chest, that warmth again. That familiar subtle power. You glance back at the tea room. It doesn't look ancient. It doesn't look sacred. But you know better. You know, it holds centuries. You wake to the sound of rain tapping gently on a tiled roof. It's the 1920s now. Japan has changed again faster this time. The Meiji era gave way to the Taisho period, and now the early Showa years are upon you. Cities have exploded into metropolises. The train lines hum with punctual electricity. And yet tucked between a cigarette shop and a noodle stall in a quiet Kyoto alley, a sliding door opens to a world that is not rushed. You step inside a tea room so small it could be mistaken for a closet. 4.5 mats, enough space to kneel, bow, and boil. Everything in this room is a whisper. The scroll reads, Ichigo Ichi, one time, one meeting. A phrase you've seen before. But here tonight it feels heavier. You realize it's not just a poetic reminder. It's a resistance. A resistance to haste, to homogeneity, to forgetting that moments can still be sacred even in the age of telephones and newspapers. Your host is a young man with round glasses and a quiet demeanor. He tells you he studied in Germany but returned to Kyoto to learn tea. Why? Because when the rest of life feels like jazz, he says this feels like silence between the notes. Historians still argue whether Japan's tea culture was diluted during modernization or reconcentrated like matcha itself into a thicker, bolder form. You're starting to see it's the latter, because even as the nation pivots toward industry and imperial power, the tea ceremony becomes something more than tradition. It becomes intention. You visit a tea school nestled within a concrete neighborhood. The building is new, angular, a bit cold, but inside tatami. Incense. Stillness. Students recite the seasonal placements of utensils as if reviewing algebra. And among them women, many. You remember that once tea was the purview of monks, then warriors, then statesmen. But now, in an era teetering on modern gender shifts, women are becoming the keepers of tea. They host, they instruct, they preserve. And they do it with ferocity, cloaked in grace. One woman tells you she learned tea not from her mother, but from her aunt, who believed it trained the mind like philosophy. There's no room to lie, she says. The tea shows everything, and you smile, because it's true. You attend a modern tea competition, a strange phrase, you admit, but one that exists. Tea schools now operate like miniature kingdoms. Omotesenke, Urasenke, Mushanokoji Senke, each with its own inflection-style interpretation of the core principles. You're reminded of a jazz quartet again. Different solos, same key. One school has introduced a tea scoop, carved from driftwood collected after a flood. Another favors whisking in silence, no introductory bow. Tradition bends, not breaks. And yet, despite the debates over ritual placement kneeling angles, or which season demands which scroll, no one questions the purpose. Harmony, respect, purity, tranquility, those still hold. You walk through a Tokyo department store and stumble across a demonstration, a tea host, kneeling before a crowd performing a condensed ceremony. Shoppers pause transfixed. Children gape. Someone in a business suit takes notes. It's a performance, but it's also a pulse. Proof that tea, even in a world of advertisements and telegrams, still offers something too quiet to market but too vital to ignore. You hear a rumor that government officials are quietly encouraged to study tea before foreign service assignments. Why? Because it teaches presence, nuance, the ability to listen without interrupting. You think what a strange thing to train diplomats in whisking matcha. Then you remember the silence between phrases, the weight of gesture, the emotional fluency built into the choreography of the tea room. Maybe it's not strange at all. Maybe it's genius. You meet a novelist who tells you she used to hate tea. Too slow, she says. Too stiff. Then she fell in love with a man who never spoke much but always served tea before bed. Now every book she writes begins after her morning bowl. There's something about it, she admits, that loosens the spine without numbing the mind. You nod. Because yes, you hear of a Zen monk who hosts tea once a week, but only for strangers. Friends know you too well, he says. Strangers, let the tea speak. His tea room has no Tokonomono hanging scroll. Just light, just steam, just the sound of breath. You attend a gathering with university students. They're studying everything from physics to French cinema. But tonight they're folding fukusa cloths with the precision of carpenters. They argue gently about the best water temperature for spring matcha. One admits he's here for the snacks. Another says, it's the only place I can fail gracefully. You sip, then laugh, then sip again. The war is coming. You can feel it in the air and the papers and the sudden tension behind each goodbye. But for now, here in this moment, in this sip, there is only peace. And that you realize is the gift of tea. Not to erase the world's noise, but to offer a place where it can be set down, even if just for one bowl, even if just for one breath. You walk home beneath city lights that flicker like fireflies. The air is heavy with coming rain. You pass a man in uniform pausing under a lantern. He holds something in his hand, a thermos. The lid is off, steam curls upward. Green, still sacred. You wake to drums in the distance, low, steady, ceremonial. It's the early 1940s now, and Japan is in the thick of war. Cities pulse with military drills. Factories churn out uniforms and rations, and radio towers hum with imperial broadcasts. The tone of life has sharpened like a blade honed too often. And yet, in a quiet Kyoto suburb, a tea room still stands. You duck through the entrance. The air is soft with charcoal heat. A kettle murmurs over the hearth. The scroll reads simply, Moo nothingness. Outside, the world is unraveling. Inside, tea is being whisked as it has been for centuries. Only now it feels like resistance. You sit beside a young woman in navy blue. She bows without speaking. Her hands tremble just slightly as she folds the silk cloth. When the bowl is passed to you, she doesn't smile, but she doesn't have to. The gesture says everything. You sip. The taste is bitter. Intentionally so. Historians still argue whether wartime tea ceremonies were an act of escapism or subtle defiance. You decide it doesn't matter. What matters is that people still kneel, still breathe, still serve. Even when the rice is rationed, the water is cold, the bowl chipped. Especially then. A government official once declared that the tea ceremony was unpatriotic, too soft, he said. Too passive. But others countered that its discipline trained the mind, sharpened loyalty, and embodied the samurai virtues of restraint. So tea survived. Not widely, not always comfortably, but it endured in corners behind sliding doors and basements, lit by candles in mountain retreats where students and teachers passed down the forms with whispered urgency. You attend a gathering hosted by an elderly master, his hair stark. White, his movements slow but exact. He teaches a new greeting, one palm over the other with a deeper bow. For the dead, he says quietly. Later, as the guests prepare to leave, he places a single camellia on the tatami. No vase, no words, just loss and love. You travel to Tokyo and see a different scene. A black market matcha vendor half laughing as he spoons green powder into small paper twists. Luxury for the end, he says. Better to go out with taste. He's not entirely joking. You visit a school where girls practice serving tea in gas masks. The ceremony continues. The breath changes. One instructor says it teaches calm under pressure. Another mutters, everything else has been taken. This is ours. You remember a phrase from a much older master tea as a mirror. And war is a hammer. The ceremonies shrink during this time. Less display, less drama. The utensils are plainer. The sweets simpler, sometimes just salted beans on rice paper. But what remains is the rhythm. Fold, bow, scoop, whisk, sip, repeat. You speak with a soldier on leave. He tells you his mother made him kneel for tea before every deployment. She said it was to remember life so I wouldn't forget to come back. He laughs a dry sound. She still does it, even now. And then he looks down. You don't ask if he believes he will return. You just hand him your own wrapped cloth. A spare, you say. He takes it. In the final years of the war, bombs fall across Japan's cities. Wooden homes vanish in flame. Temples crumble. And still in pockets of shadow, the ritual holds. One master writes his entire lineage on the back of a scroll before evacuating. He tucks it into a hollow bamboo stalk and buries it in the earth. It will be found 40 years later. You sit in a mountain hut with 3 strangers and share a bowl of cold tea made with spring water. No formal words, no formal posture. Just eyes meeting over chipped ceramic and the slow passage of time. It's the most silent ceremony you've ever attended. And the most profound! Because even here, even now, tea still offers its strange magic presence without pressure. Connection without demand, peace without explanation. After the war ends, Japan is in ruins, but the tea rooms, they reemerge, slowly, deliberately, like moss after fire. Old masters begin to teach again, often for free. Students return, some young, some gray-haired, all hungry for something beyond survival. You visit one such school rebuilt from salvaged wood. The teacher bows to each student as if to a monarch. "We all begin again," she says. You nod. Because yes, because even in ashes ceremony finds form. Even in silence rhythm returns. You notice something else: the tea rooms begin to shift. Not just in space, but in tone. They become places for mourning, yes, but also for forgiveness. For remembering that stillness is not the opposite of action. It's the condition that allows action to mean something. You sip your tea slowly. The flavor is different, deeper. Maybe it's the war. Maybe it's the water. Maybe it's just you. You look down at your bowl dark glaze, catching the faintest glint of afternoon light. A new era is beginning. But the tea is eternal. The war is over now. Japan's cities sprawl in rebuilding. Steel and concrete rise where wooden homes once stood. Neon glows, trains hum, and vending machines sell everything from umbrellas to hot corn soup. But in the midst of this modernity, this rush toward global relevance, you slip off your shoes, slide open a paper door, and step into another century. You're in a post-war tea room. It's small, always is. 4.5 tatami mats, no more. The air is scented with sandalwood and warm straw. Outside, a car honks, and inside there is only steam and silence. You kneel. The host bows. She is young, barely out of university. She wears a synthetic kimono patterned with digital cherry blossoms. Her hair is pinned with plastic. Her hands move with grace anyway. The scroll reads, "Kaze wa toki o shiranai." The wind knows no time. You smile. You're not here for the past. You're here for what the past still knows. Tea in post-war Japan transforms once again. It's no longer a marker of rank, a covert political signal, or an act of wartime survival. It becomes something both smaller and larger, an expression of cultural identity, in a country suddenly awash in Coca-Cola and compact discs. Historians still argue whether this was a revival or a reinvention. You decide it's both. The old schools, Ura-senkei, Omota-senkei, Mushana-koji-senkei, reopen with eager students. Housewives, businessmen, bored teenagers, foreigners with phrase books and curiosity. They all come. And they all sit. And they all learn. You sit beside a salaryman in pinstripes. He's sweating slightly. He fumbles his bow. His tea spills a little. No one corrects him, because now the tea room is a sanctuary, not just from noise, but from perfection. Your host serves wagashi shaped like camellias. Sweet, soft, slightly too beautiful to eat. But you eat them anyway, because this ceremony is not a museum piece. It's alive. A woman beside you says she started tea lessons after seeing her grandmother's tea bowl cracked in the earthquake. "It reminded me that beauty survives breaks," she says. You nod. Because that sounds exactly right. You visit a tea exhibition at a Tokyo museum. Under glass 15th century bowls, lacquered spoons, scrolls inked with brushstrokes so confident they feel like whispers. Beside them, a video plays of a modern ceremony, plastic chairs, folding screen, battery-powered kettle. The contrast is stark, and yet the rhythm's still there. A tea master once said, "If the tools change, the spirit must remain." Another replied, "If the spirit changes, change the tools." They both smiled. You like that. You visit Kyoto again. The old districts still have their cobblestones, their narrow alleys, their paper lanterns. You attend a ceremony at a centuries-old tea room, where the tatami has been replaced 36 times, but the foundation stones haven't moved in 300 years. The host this time is a man in his 60s. He's a ceramicist by trade. Says he makes bowls just to use them. Otherwise, he says they're just statues. He passes you one of his own. It's thick, heavy, glazed in muddy green and streaked with gold. It looks like moss in morning sun. You lift it. It's warm. You sip. The matcha is smoother now than it used to be. Imported water filters, temperature-controlled kettles. But the silence afterward, the stillness in your bones, that part just as ancient. Outside, children run past in Pokemon t-shirts. Inside, someone bows. Post-war Japan embraced tea as a bridge. Between generations, between East and West, between memory and motion. You attend a seminar titled Chanoyu in the Age of AI. The speaker argues that tea may be the last analog ritual in a digital world, that its value lies not in efficiency but in deliberate slowness. You think about that as you stand at a platform watching bullet trains race past. Everything's faster now, but when you return home, when you boil the water, when you fold the cloth, when you turn the bowl 3 times in your palms, time slows again. You host your own small tea gathering. Your friends giggle as they try to kneel without falling over. One of them asks if she has to bow to the teacup. You say no. Then she does anyway. Later they fall silent. Just for a moment. One says this feels peaceful. Like I'm allowed to be slow. You smile. You pass her the next bowl. You think about all the forms tea has taken: power play rebellion, spiritual retreat, quiet act of self-respect. You wonder what shape it will take next. There's a growing movement now: sustainable tea, organic farms, reclaimed ceramics, solar-heated water, young tea masters teaching ceremonies through live streams balancing centuries of tradition with 1080p video. You watch one such host, a woman in New York, kneel on a tatami mat, laid out in her tiny apartment, a shelf of manga behind her, her dog snoring in the corner. She bows to the camera and says, "Let's begin." You watch the whole thing. And when she lifts the bowl to the screen and says, "To you, you lift yours too." Across oceans, across centuries, a shared silence, a shared sip. The form evolves. The meaning deepens. The bowl passes on. You wake up early the next morning. The sky outside your window is still the kind of soft, bluish gray that makes everything feel unfinished. You stretch shuffle to the kitchen and boil water, not for speed, not for caffeine, but for the ceremony of it. Because now you know, you're no tea master. You don't have lacquered spoons or a silk fukusa cloth for your fingertips. But you do have time, and that's enough. You pour hot water into a thick mug. Not porcelain, not raku. Just your favorite chipped one. You sit at the table, you sip. And even though no one is watching, you turn the mug slightly in your hands. 3 times. Because habits are sticky like that. Centuries ago, this gesture might have been a symbol of loyalty, of status, of carefully measured diplomacy. Now it's just a private moment, a quiet echo, the past filtering through the present in the form of steeped leaves and stillness. You smile. Back in feudal Japan, the tea ceremony helped shape alliances. It was a tool of silent persuasion, a chessboard without pieces. But it was also something else, a reminder that even in turbulent times, beauty still mattered. That simplicity could be an anchor. Historians still argue whether tea ceremonies were more political than poetic, whether they were art or just artifice. Some say they kept the peace. Some say they masked violence. Most agree they did both. But you've realized something better. You've realized that tea was never just a drink. It was a decision, a choice to pause, to notice, to take part in something ritualized and slow and oddly human. And as the centuries wore on, from emperors to generals, monks to merchants, students to tourists, that decision kept being made. 1,000 times a day. In cities and villages, on tatami mats and folding chairs, with golden bowls or paper cups. Because tea never demanded loyalty. It invited presence. Even today, in a world full of pings and push notifications, there is something deeply radical about boiling water and waiting. You walk through a quiet garden later that afternoon. Just a local one, nothing special. A gravel path, some carefully trimmed shrubs, a koi pond, pretending not to exist until you're close enough to notice the movement beneath. You sit on a wooden bench. The breeze nudges your collar. A child walks past with a bottle of green tea, unscrews the cap, and takes a loud, slurping sip. You don't mind. The form is different, but the idea is still there. Somewhere in the background, a wind chime sings once. The sound barely lasts, but your ears hold it. This is tea, too. It isn't always formal. It doesn't need incense or silence. Sometimes it just needs attention and the willingness to be still. You think of the tea masters who shaped history not by shouting, but by sitting. You think of the bowls that cracked and were repaired with gold. You think of the generals who bowed over steam instead of swords. You think of yourself. Now part of that lineage. You know the truth now. The real secret behind all those ancient tea ceremonies. The thing they couldn't say aloud but tried to show you through every gesture, every fold, every deliberate pause between each motion. It wasn't just about politics. It wasn't just about power. It was about presence. The radical, stubborn, soul-deep act of being here with the water, with the silence with yourself. And that more than anything is what lasted.